Hi, welcome to Crash Course World History. My name is Sam Fleckenstein.
And I'm Gries-Hoffman.
And today we'll be talking about terrorism.
Terrorism can be a touchy subject, and it's important to know the facts about it while avoiding common misconceptions and stereotypes. According to the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, terrorism is defined as the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof, in furtherance of political or social objectives. This can be for many different reasons. Terrorist attacks can be carried out solely by an organization, or they can be state-sponsored, or even both.
That was good. Whoa! The beginnings of what we know as organized terror today occurred in ancient Rome with the Zealots of Judea, known to the Romans as Sicarii or daggermen. The Zealots believed that they could not remain faithful to the dictates of Judaism while under Roman control. So they carried out an underground campaign of assassinations on Roman occupation forces, along with any Jews they felt had collaborated with the Romans. Eventually, the Zealot revolt became open, and they were finally besieged and committed mass suicide.
Happy. The assassins were the next group to show recognizable characteristics of terrorism as we know it today. A breakaway faction of Shia Islam, called the Nizari Islamists, adopted the tactic of assassinating enemy leaders simply because the cult's limited manpower prevented open combat. Their leader, Hassami Sabah, based the cult in the mountains of northern Iran. Their tactic of sending a lone assassin to successfully kill a key enemy leader at the certain sacrifice of the assassin's life inspired a fearful awe in their enemies.
And even though the Zealots and the Assassins were very old school by today's standards, they're still relevant.
They're important, first as a precursor of modern terrorism and terrorist organizations in the areas of motivation, organization, targeting, and goals.
Second, although both organizations and their attacks ended in ultimate failure, the fact that they are remembered hundreds of years later demonstrates the deep psychological impact they caused.
Historically, terrorism has been used to influence the political and social views of the public. This goes hand in hand with the influences of revolutions and political movements. Terrorism in these revolutions was either state-sponsored or promoted by independent organizations, but sometimes it's difficult to definitively say whether it was one or the other.
First of all, state-sponsored terrorism is defined as government support for violent non-state actors engaged in terrorism. So what counts as state-sponsored terror really stems back to the age-old issue of what counts as a state.
To make the confusion even more confusing, we'll take a look at the most confusing thing of all, the Irish Revolution.
The Irish Revolution started in the early 1900s and has never really ended, and is more at rest than totally dead. The Irish Republican Army spearheaded the movement and committed numerous ambushes, bombings, shootings, and assassinations on British forces, and all in all, it was a mess.
This is an example of one of those fuzzy gray areas where state-sponsored terrorism versus independently organized terrorism could be confused, simply because the Irish Revolution was complicated and many attacks were brought out by different organizations.
Another way to look at terrorism in revolutions is by looking at what role it played in the revolution's outcome. And for this, we're going to take a look at the French Revolution. Let's go to the thought bubble.
The French Revolution was actually the first use of the English term terrorism, which came from the French Reign of Terror, or in French, La Terreur, which took place from September 1793 to July 1794.
The Reign of Terror was a period of 11 months during the French Revolution when the Jacobins, who ruled the revolutionary state, employed terrible violence. This included mass executions by guillotine in order to intimidate the regime's enemies and compel obedience to the state through fear. The French Revolution is an excellent example of just how effective terror can be on a nation's politics. Think about it. Would you rather have your head cut off or join the Jacobins?
Today, terrorism still has the ability to significantly alter a nation or region's politics. The most well-known example of this can be seen in the Middle East.
Before we dive into exactly what's happening in the Middle East, it's important to note that in general, the motives of modern terrorism took a shift from what it used to be in the past. Historically, terrorism was typically associated with anarchism, rising nationalism, and anti-monarchism. However, terrorism is more commonly associated with religious ideologies in the modern day.
This is typically due to who many people know as radical Islamic terrorists, who are essentially very extreme jihadist Muslims. The term jihad is an Arabic word which literally means striving or struggling. However, jihad can also be described as a holy war similar to the term crusade.
Jihadism began in the late 20th century as a fundamentalist movement seeking to purify Islam, similarly to how evangelicals sought to purify Christianity in the past. An important belief of jihadists is that Islam should return to its traditional culture and stay unchanged by the West.
Radical Islamic terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS have taken this to the extreme and have declared war on the West.
In recent years, radical Islamic terrorists, acting alone or with the orders of terrorist organizations such as these, have committed many bombings, shootings, and other attacks to threaten Western culture. To provide a scale of how recent these attacks are occurring, a bombing on May 22nd of this year at a concert in Manchester, the United Kingdom, killed 22 people and was claimed by ISIS. Go ahead.
However, with all of this being said, radical Islamic terrorists, the Western media, and the phrase itself leave Westerners with false assumptions of the Middle East and the Muslim people.
It's a little known fact that 84% of terror attacks in the United States are conducted by American citizens. So it's more than unfair to assume that all attacks in America are carried out by people from the Middle East.
Another little known fact is that 93% of all Muslims reject extremist views of terrorism. So it's also very unfair to claim that all Muslims are terrorists, when it's not even close to what's true.
It's even false to say that all jihadists are terrorists, because jihad is such a broad term applying to Muslims and Arabic speakers. A jihadist in the Middle East could be a non-radicalized Muslim fundamentalist, or even someone doing charitable acts such as trying to end hunger. This is known as a person's jihad.
Much of America's efforts in counterterrorism are focused on the Middle East.
A moment that defined terrorism in the West was 9/11. 9/11 was a hijacking of 4 planes that were flown into the 2 World Trade Towers, the Pentagon, and the 4th landed in a field. Terrorism in the West was now defined as pre- or post-9/11, along with many other factors of Western civilization, simply because 9/11 was such a groundbreaking event.
Well, would you look at that? It's time for the open letter. Let's see what's in the secret compartment today. Oh, look at that. It's a mini shampoo bottle. An open letter to the TSA. Dear the Transportation Security Agency, while we know your intentions are good and that you were created to stop terrorists after 9/11, you're almost completely useless. The total number of terrorist attacks you've actually stopped is 0, and in May 2015, it was revealed that you're missing guns and bombs through your screening process 95% of the time. Not only that, but you failed to identify 73 aviation workers with links to terrorism. And while you may be scaring the terrorists away from our airports, are you really worth the $7.6 billion we budget for you every year? Just kidding, we love you guys, kind of. But really, the shampoo? Best wishes, Sam Fleckenstein. Living in the West during the post-9/11 era provides citizens with an uncertain environment where terrorism is concerned. It's the thought of terrorism that really scares us.
And while it sounds unsatisfactory, the best thing we can do as citizens of America is to not be afraid, but instead be informed.
It's important for the world to avoid stereotypes and misconceptions, no matter how obvious they may seem, because cultural tensions will rise when a certain demographic is labeled as responsible.
This has been Crash Course. Thanks for watching.